15-year-old black boy sits quietly in a corner booth of a downtown cafe, backpack at his feet, waiting for his mother to finish her hospital shift. He's not loud. He's not asking for anything, just waiting. But the white store manager watches him like he's a threat. Eyes narrowed, jaw tight, he makes a call. Minutes later, 2 police officers walk in. They don't ask questions. They surround the teen, demand his ID, and order him to empty his pockets. Customers watch. No one speaks. No one moves. He's treated like a thief, like a suspect, in broad daylight, for doing absolutely nothing. His hands tremble as he follows orders, then heels click across the floor. A black woman steps through the door, calm as stone. She walks past the gawking crowd, past the frozen manager, and right up to the lead officer. She flashes her badge. The room goes silent, because the boy they just humiliated is her son, and she is their superior officer. He was the kind of boy most people overlooked, quiet, tall for his age but soft-spoken. At 15, Malik already knew how to make himself small in spaces that didn't want him. His world was books, numbers, and silence. While other kids played video games or chased popularity, Malik memorized equations and watched documentaries with his mother after long days of school and her longer shifts. She worked nights at the hospital, a lieutenant in the city's trauma unit, and a decorated veteran of the force before that. A black woman in charge of crisis response, trained to stay calm when the world cracked open. Every day she told Malik to keep his head down, stay polite, let the world say what it would, but never forget who he was. Most afternoons, she picked him up after his study group or robotics club. But this one day, she ran behind. It was the day that would make the world notice Malik for something he never asked for. The cafe was one of those sleek downtown spots that promised community and comfort, but rarely to people who looked like him. White walls, soft music, laptops open on every table, a place where regulars ordered matcha and oat milk lattes, where silence was expected, but only from the right kind of guest. Malik entered quietly, laptop in hand. He bought a small tea, green, no sugar, and found a corner booth. He wasn't loud, he didn't stretch out. He sat with his headphones in, reading over his math notes, waiting for his mother to text that she was pulling up. But the manager had been watching since he walked in. Gary Rusk had worked there for years, a man who prided himself on order, on routine, on reading people. And when he saw Malik, he didn't see a kid with perfect grades and a patient soul. He saw a threat, something about the hoodie, the skin, the silence. He approached once, asked if Malik needed help. Malik answered politely, said no thank you, just waiting for his mom. 5 minutes passed. He approached again, asked if he planned on ordering anything else. Malik looked confused, held up his paper cup, said no, just waiting. Then Gary walked back behind the counter, pulled out his phone, and called the non-emergency police line. Said there was a loiterer, possibly disruptive. No purchase made. Suspicious. It didn't take long. 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes. The cafe didn't stop. Laptops stayed open, coffee machines hissed, but eyes lifted, heads turned. No one said a word. Malik looked up and froze. One officer motioned for him to stand. The other asked him what he was doing there. Malik said the same thing again. Waiting for my mom. They asked if he had ID. He reached into his bag slowly, cautiously, showed them his school card. The manager pointed, said he'd asked Malik to leave, said he felt unsafe. No one challenged him, no one questioned anything. And so a gifted, polite black teenager stood in the middle of a coffee shop, being treated like a criminal, for simply being there. This moment the officers asked to search his backpack, Malik's hands began to shake. His mother was only 3 minutes away. One of the officers, stocky build, pale skin, tight jaw, stepped closer. His partner, younger and visibly unsure, lingered behind him like a shadow. The lead officer spoke first, voice firm, rehearsed. "We've had a complaint. You're not a paying customer. We need you to step outside." Malik glanced around. Still, holding his cup. still seated exactly where he'd been for the last 30 minutes. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "I am a paying customer. I bought tea." He held it up like proof, like a passport. It was half full, still warm. But the officer didn't look at the cup. He looked at Malik's hands, then at the backpack. On the floor. "What's in the bag?" the officer asked. Malik hesitated. It was the kind of pause every black boy learns not to take. It lasted half a second too long. "I need you to open it," the officer continued. "Now." Malik's fingers trembled as he reached down. He unzipped it slowly. Notebooks, a calculator, graph paper, a cracked phone charger. The officer still wasn't satisfied. He nudged it with his boot. "Any weapons? Anything illegal?" Malik shook his head. "No." The younger officer shifted on his feet, looked over at the barista. She quickly turned away, busying herself with a stack of clean mugs. Gary, the manager, stood behind the counter, arms folded like a man watching justice unfold. His jaw was clenched, but a smirk tugged at the corners. To him, this was what keeping order looked like. A few customers watched from their seats. A woman with a stroller stopped sipping her latte. A man by the window pulled his phone halfway out of his pocket but didn't hit record. One college student opened her camera app but kept it angled down, catching audio, not video. No one said anything. No one asked what Malik had done. No one asked why. The officer kept pressing. "Do you have ID? Are you on probation? Has anyone ever filed a complaint against you?" The words didn't make sense. Malik blinked slowly, confused. "I'm 15, he said, the words cracking. "I've never been in trouble." But that didn't matter. His answers didn't carry weight in that moment. Not with that uniform. Not with that skin. The questions weren't about truth. They were about control. A chair scraped across the floor. Someone stood, then sat back down. The tension hung in the room like smoke. No one intervened. No one helped. Then the officer gave the order. "Stand up. We'll finish this outside." Malik rose slowly. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. His eyes stayed on the floor, his lips pressed together, trying not to shake. As he walked toward the door, the cafe buzzed on like nothing was wrong. Someone added sugar to their coffee. Another typed an email. The woman with the camera app angled it up now, catching Malik's slumped shoulders as he walked past her. Outside, the air was cooler. Malik stood by the police car while they ran his name. No record, of course, nothing to report. He stood there, bag at his feet, arms crossed over his chest, not out of defiance, but to stop his body from trembling. One of the officers kept looking, down the street, scanning for something, or someone. Inside the cafe, Gary was already wiping the counter, self-satisfied. As far as he was concerned, he'd done his part. He'd de-escalated. But 3 blocks away, a black SUV was weaving through afternoon traffic, and in the passenger seat sat a woman in navy blue. No siren, no lights, just a badge on her chest and a fire in her bones. The phone in Malik's pocket buzzed. Text from, "Mom, I'm here. What's going on?" His fingers were stiff when he answered. "Cops. They made me come outside." There was no reply, just silence. Until seconds later she pulled up. Malik stood motionless, back against the cool brick wall of the cafe, his backpack beside him like a discarded object. His breath came slow, deliberate. He had learned to breathe like that, deeply, quietly, because crying in public was dangerous. The lead officer tapped impatiently on the side of the cruiser, waiting for the results of the ID check. His partner scrolled his tablet, occasionally, glancing up at Malik like he wasn't sure what he was looking for anymore. Inside, Gary wiped down tables that were already clean. A gesture of control, a performance. Through the window, he watched Malik as if waiting for him to break, to lash out and justify it all. But Malik didn't break. The screen in the cruiser chirped. "Nothing," the officer muttered. "Clean. Still." He didn't dismiss him. The second officer shifted again. "He said he's just waiting for his mom. Maybe we—" Before he could finish, the SUV pulled up. Slow. Silent. The passenger door opened and she stepped out. Tall, composed. Her navy, uniform pressed sharp at the seams. No sirens, no shouting, no panic. She walked directly toward them, her heels clicking on the pavement with quiet authority. Her eyes didn't flicker to the cafe windows. She didn't glance at the crowd. She saw only one thing: her son. Malik looked up and exhaled for the first time in minutes. His shoulders dropped half an inch. Not because he was saved, but because she was here. She didn't speak right away. She stood next to him, one hand on his back, the other reaching into her jacket. From it, she pulled a leather badge holder. She held it up. Slowly. Intentionally. It caught the sunlight. Lieutenant Marlene Hayes. Internal Affairs. The young officer's face drained of color. His partner stiffened like a soldier caught saluting the wrong flag. "Lieutenant," the lead officer said, trying to recover. We didn't know." She didn't respond. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand an apology. She just looked at them, long enough for silence to become shame. She turned to her son, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Get in the car." Malik obeyed without hesitation. As he walked past the officers, past the cafe windows, something shifted. Not in him, but in the people watching. Inside, the barista stood frozen with a milk pitcher in hand. One customer quietly lowered his phone. Another closed her laptop and stared down at her drink. Gary stepped out from behind the counter, blinking in confusion. He took a step toward the door, then stopped. He had nothing to say. Lieutenant Hayes stayed behind for just a moment longer. She tucked the badge back into her coat. Her eyes never left the two officers. Still, she didn't raise her voice. She simply asked, "Is that how you treat children?" Then she turned and walked back to her car, not with anger, with control. And that, more than anything, left them speechless. Back in the car, Malik sat silently in the passenger seat. His hands rested on his lap, palms open, like he didn't know what to do with them now that they were no longer being watched. Lieutenant Hayes drove 2 blocks before pulling into a quiet parking lot. She didn't speak. Neither did he. She didn't need to ask what happened. She'd seen it 100 times, just never so close to home. She had spent years investigating officers like the two who stood frozen outside the cafe. Years buried in files of complaints that were never supposed to exist. She had sat across from men who swore they weren't racist, just careful. She had written reports that no one wanted to read, but nothing had prepared her for seeing her own son treated like that. She turned to him slowly. "You okay?" Malik nodded. "Barely." "Did you raise your voice?" He shook his head. "Did you move too fast?" Again, no. "Then you did nothing wrong." He exhaled. It was not comfort. It was not peace. But it was clarity. An hour later, she made the call. Not to scream, not to threaten, just to ask for the body cam footage. She used her title, not her tone. She requested a written explanation from the responding officers. She logged it into the system herself. The department knew her, knew she didn't bluff. 2 days later, Officer Simmons and Officer Decker were placed on leave pending an investigation. At the same time, an anonymous video surfaced. Shaky footage of Malik being questioned. Silent audio of him emptying his pockets. A glimpse of the manager gesturing toward the door. No narration. No commentary. Just a question posted with the video. Would they have treated your child this way? The video spread. Not a wildfire, but a slow burn. The kind that lingered. The kind that made people uncomfortable. Local news stations picked it up, not with sirens or breaking news, but with headlines that asked more than they answered. Boy searched at cafe while waiting for mom. Mother turns out to be police lieutenant. City officials call for policy review after racial profiling incident. Gary, the manager, stopped showing up to work. The cafe owner made a statement 3 days later, generic, half-hearted. But the damage had been done. Reviews flooded in. Patrons shared their own stories, some quiet, some furious, but most said the same thing. We see it now. The city council scheduled an emergency meeting. Not just for this incident, but because it wasn't the first. Inside the department, the lieutenant's name gained weight, not as a mother who lost her temper, but as a woman who never had to raise it to shift the ground beneath their feet. And Malik? He stayed home the next few days, homework untouched, head full of questions, until a letter came from the youth community center, inviting him to speak. Not about the incident, but about how he stayed calm, about how silence can be powerful. He didn't know if he wanted to go, but his mother smiled and said, "They're ready to listen now." And this time, when he entered the building, everyone stood. Have you ever been judged for how you look or where you're from? Share your story in the comments. We're listening. By the end of the week, Lieutenant Marlene Hayes sat in a closed-door meeting with the city's chief of police and 2 council members. She did not ask for a public hearing. She did not demand headlines. She simply brought documents, procedure manuals, patrol logs, internal bias reports, each one marked with a quiet pattern, a line of behavior no one had addressed until now. The chief listened, eyes heavy, not out of sympathy, but weight. Because this time, it wasn't just another complaint. It was from one of their own. The department issued a statement that evening, carefully worded, with no direct apology. But the words "under review" and "commitment to community trust" stood out. Within days, Officers Simmons and Decker were placed under formal investigation for racial profiling and failure to follow protocol during a low-risk civilian encounter. It was the first time in 5 years that such a review had been triggered by a fellow officer. Public pressure mounted. The cafe owner, under fire from customers and staff, quietly severed ties with Gary Rusk. An HR email labeled the departure mutual. But everyone knew the truth. He was no longer welcome. The barista who had frozen during the incident submitted an anonymous op-ed to the local newspaper. In it, she wrote, "I thought staying silent made me neutral, but it made me complicit. I watched a child be humiliated and I said nothing. I will not make that mistake again." Her word spread faster than the video. Within 2 weeks, the city's Civil Rights Council proposed a new policy, requiring all businesses partnering with city vendors to undergo racial bias training. It wasn't sweeping reform, but it was movement. The Fort mayor, under public pressure, approved a community oversight panel to review incidents involving minors and police response. For the first time, citizens, especially black parents, would have a seat at the table. And at the center of it all was a name people didn't know just a month before, Malik Hayes. He never spoke on camera. He never sat for interviews, but his presence carried weight now. He returned to the youth center quietly, walked into the auditorium in jeans and a hoodie, just like the day it all began. Except this time, when he stepped up to the mic, the room leaned in. He didn't speak for long. Just one sentence that echoed louder than any speech. "I didn't do anything wrong." And that was the truth the whole city had to reckon with. The cafe now had new posters by the register. "All are welcome here." But deeper than signs and statements, the tone had changed. Staff meetings included community leaders. Hiring shifted. The next barista hired was a local teen who looked a lot like Malik. At the precinct, things moved slower, but they moved. A new training module was approved, designed by Lieutenant Hayes herself. It wasn't just about what officers did. It was about what they assumed. Even the officers involved changed. Officer Decker, the younger one, requested reassignment after the investigation. In a confidential exit note, he wrote, "That kid reminded me of my nephew, and I didn't see it until it was too late." As for Simmons, his file remained under review, but the shield he once hid behind no longer made him invisible. This wasn't justice in a courtroom. There were no verdicts, no gavel, but it was justice. Nonetheless, slow, quiet, real. Weeks passed, then months. The story faded from the front page, but it never disappeared. It lived inside conversations, in teacher lounges, in council meetings, in the shift of how people looked at Malik and how they looked at themselves. Lieutenant Hayes never once held a press conference. She declined interviews. She returned to her shift rotation like nothing had changed, but everything had. She became the name whispered in meetings when someone questioned protocol, the officer people referenced when they thought no one was watching. Her badge, once a symbol of silent perseverance, now carried a different weight. And Malik? He walked a little straighter now, not because he wanted attention, but because he had survived something that tried to shrink him. He didn't speak much about that day. He didn't need to. His classmates treated him differently, more carefully at first. Some with guilt, others with quiet admiration. The teachers who used to overlook him now asked his opinion during discussions, not because he had changed, but because they finally saw him. One of his math teachers nominated him for a regional scholarship. When the committee asked for an essay, he submitted one titled, "The Value of Stillness." It ended with one line, "Sometimes silence is louder than fear." At the youth summit, Malik sat beside city officials, educators, and local business owners. He didn't say much, but when he did speak, people listened. Not because of the viral video, but because his words held weight. A mural was painted across the wall of the community center months later. It didn't show a dramatic confrontation. No fists raised, no shouts frozen in time. It showed a boy sitting at a table with a laptop and a teacup. A quiet scene, a normal one. The kind of moment that should never have required justice. And beneath the image, a quote from Malik's essay, "The right to wait should not be earned." Inside the precinct, the training Lieutenant Hayes designed rolled out citywide. Officers were no longer just graded on their arrests, but also their judgment, their ability to de-escalate, to recognize bias in the moment, not in hindsight. It wasn't perfect. Some resisted. Some called it unnecessary. But the standard had shifted. And no one dared question the woman behind it. One morning, 6 months after the incident, Lieutenant Hayes walked into the cafe again, alone this time. She stood in line. The barista recognized her immediately, but said nothing, just made her drink. She took her tea, sat in the same corner, booth where Malik had once waited. A few heads turned, not in judgment, in recognition. The cafe was quieter now, gentler. A young employee, new, walked over and asked if she needed anything else. She smiled and said no. Then she looked up and noticed the wall above the condiment station. A new plaque recently mounted, in honor of dignity, for those who waited and were not welcomed. May that never happen here again. No name, no photo, just truth. She sipped her tea slowly, the same tea her son held when the world tried to define him. Now that same world was still shifting, because he never let it. Malik never wanted to be a symbol. He never asked to be in the center of a storm. All he wanted was to wait for his mother in peace, finish his homework, and go home. But the world doesn't always give that peace to boys who look like him. So he became something else, not loud, not defiant, but steady. A reminder that dignity doesn't need to shout to be heard, that strength can sit quietly at a table, drink a cup of tea, and refuse to disappear. His mother, too, never sought power for its own sake. She wore the badge to protect people, not prove anything. And when the moment came, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She just stood still, and the room adjusted around her. Their story didn't end in court or chaos. It ended in something better. Awareness. Change that lasts. A shift in how people see. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it enters a room, says nothing, and makes everyone else go quiet. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes quiet strength cannot change the world. Because it can, and it just did.